The Miracles and Prophecies of Saint John Bosco, a project of America Needs Fatima. I'm your host, Matthew Miller. This is part 2 of Saint John Bosco's dream, Death's Messenger, and if you haven't seen part 1 yet, I'd recommend clicking on the link in the description below. A month had passed since Don Bosco's announcement of the impending death of one of the boys, and the apprehension his words produced was waning in some. Many, however, kept asking, who will die? When will he die? They noticed when the Feast of Easter, or Pasch, came and went. On April 25th, Maestro, age 13, a native of Viora, Mondovi, died suddenly from a cerebral hemorrhage. He was a young man of excellent virtue who received Holy Communion several times a week. Until the predicted day, he had generally enjoyed perfect health, but for 2 weeks he had been afflicted with pain in his eyes, and in the evenings his vision became blurry. He also felt pain in his stomach. The doctor ordered him not to get out of bed with the others in the morning, but to rest until later. Don Bosco met him on the stairs one morning and asked, "Do you want to go to heaven?" "Yes," Maestro replied. "Then get ready." The young man stared at him. He was a little disturbed, but believing that Don Bosco was joking, he immediately calmed himself. Don Bosco kept close to him for a few days, preparing him with prudent warnings, and induced the boy to make a general confession. On April 24th, another young man, seeing Maestro sitting on the balcony of the infirmary, had an idea. He approached Don Bosco and asked, "Is it true that Maestro wants to die?" "What do I know about that?" replied Don Bosco. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" The young man went up to the balcony and questioned Maestro. He laughed and asked Don Bosco for permission to spend time with his family. "Gladly," Don Bosco agreed, "but before you leave, have the doctor give you a letter explaining your illness." This answer greatly consoled the young man, who reasoned that the boy in Don Bosco's dream was supposed to die in the oratory. "If I go home, it's a sign that it's not me," he thought, "so I'll take a long vacation and return to the oratory healed." On Friday, April 25th, Maestro rose in the morning with the others and attended Holy Mass. He returned to his room feeling very tired and went back to bed, telling his friends how happy he was about going home. At 9 o'clock, the school bell rang. His friends said their goodbyes to Maestro and wished him a happy vacation and a safe return. They went to their classrooms, and he remained alone in the dormitory. Then, around 10 o'clock, the nurse came by, warning Maestro that the doctor would arrive shortly. So she told him to get up and come to the infirmary to speak to the doctor so he could ask for the note he agreed upon with Don Bosco. But before we get to the conclusion of the story, I'd like to ask that if you'd like to enroll in our Saturday Mass intentions for the promoters of Saint John Bosco, please click on the link I've put in the description below, or you'll see a little icon pop up for it at the end of the video. Shortly after that, the doctor arrived. A young man from the next room who was also ill stood at Maestro's door and said loudly, "Maestro, it's time for us to go to the doctor." He called him twice, but Maestro didn't answer. Thinking he had fallen asleep, the friend approached the bed and shook him. Maestro was motionless. The frightened friend cried out, "Maestro is dead!" He ran to tell someone and first ran into Don Rua, who rushed to absolve Maestro as he breathed his last breath. He immediately warned Don Alisonati and called Don Bosco. The news of that death spread like wildfire through the schoolrooms and workshops. Many rushed and knelt to pray for the soul of the deceased. Some hoped that Maestro was still alive, but Don Bosco knew that he was dead. Everyone's heart filled with grief, especially because Maestro had departed this world without even a friend nearby. Seeing the shocked young men, Don Bosco assured them of Maestro's eternal health. He had taken Holy Communion on Wednesday, and from the Feast of All Saints' Day in November until that day, he had behaved so that his soul was well disposed and prepared for death. The clerics and young people followed one another in going to see the dead boy and to mourn their loss. They acknowledged that his death fulfilled the dream. In the evening, Don Bosco gave a moving talk that drew tears from everyone. He pointed out how God had taken 2 companions from them in the span of 9 or 10 days without either of the boys being able to receive the last comforts of our holy religion, that is, the last rites. "How deceived are they," he exclaimed, "who say that they will wait until the end of their life to clean up their conscience and put their affairs in order. But we thank the Lord that by such a death he has called to eternity 2 companions whose souls, we're sure, have been found in a good state. How much greater would be our sorrow if the Lord had allowed others to be taken from us, friends who continually behaved poorly." This death was a blessing from the Lord. Many young people asked to make a general confession on Saturday morning and evening. Don Bosco put them at peace with absolution. Then later he said, "Maestro is the one that I saw in the dream receiving the note. What greatly consoles me is that he received the Holy Sacraments on Friday morning, so his death was indeed sudden, but he wasn't unprepared." At midday on Sunday, April 27th, Maestro's body was brought to the cemetery. One circumstance also fulfilled Don Bosco's prophecy of that death. When Don Bosco had dreamed of the tall older man who presented the note to Maestro, he saw the man under the porch facing the passageway that led to the vegetable gardens. From that place, the stranger pointed to the coffin in the passage, just a few steps away. When the undertakers came to bury Maestro, passing by the central staircase, they carried the coffin under the porch to the garden entrance and asked for chairs, and they arranged them there. They waited for the priests and the students to accompany them to the Campo Santo. Don Caliero, seeing the coffin at that exact location, was upset because usually the chairs were placed at the end of the entrance by the staircase near the church. He insisted that the coffin be moved to its usual place, but the morticians grumbled in annoyance and wouldn't move it. Don Bosco came out of the church and observed the coffin. "Look," he said, "I saw it right here in the dream." None of the students knew that Maestro was the dying boy, but 2 in the oratory knew his name and had also known a few other things. At the end of February, a student who had been out of the oratory for some time died. 2 senior clerics, one of whom was Don Caliero, heard of the death and announced the loss when he met Don Bosco, who was descending to the courtyard. Don Bosco replied, "He will not be the only one. Before 2 months pass, 2 others will have to die." He disclosed their names to the 2 priests. Don Bosco would disclose such matters in strict secrecy to someone he knew to be level-headed and trustworthy, so that, without tipping off the boys in question, that trusted priest might encourage them to be good and receive the sacraments, while safeguarding them from spiritual danger. The 2 clerics gladly assumed the office of guardian angel that day, but they wrote down the prophecy, the date on which Don Bosco had announced it, and the 2 boys' names, and then they signed the paper. They went to the prefecture, affixed their seals, and deposited it there to be carefully guarded. Don Caliero, 47 years after that day, confirmed what we had described here. He still recalled the compassion he had toward those 2 when he saw them running happily up and down the courtyard and playing without any thought of the fate that awaited them, though it was not an unhappy fate. He recalled the fulfillment of the prophecy at the appointed time and the prefect's emotion when the note written 2 months earlier was unsealed. Thank you all so much for watching. God bless you, and Our Lady keep you.